Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to San Francisco Camerawork. My name is Michelle Branch, and I'm the board president of San Francisco Camerawork, and I'm really pleased to be here today. This afternoon, we're honored to welcome and introduce this afternoon's panel, um, The Politics of Black Representations, Thought on Collectivity, with panelists Dr. Leigh Raiford, Delphine Sims, and Adrian Octavius Walker, who are all in conversation together today. And we're really excited and delighted to have them here today. They want to dedicate this talk to a discussion about the etymological origins of collectivity and what it means to be together as it relates to Black photography. You know, how do historic and newfound Black artist collectives negotiate the politics of Black representation? It was actually interesting, if you were here on Tuesday night, Kija Lucas talked a little bit about the 3.9 Collective in the Bay Area and how and why that was founded. So that is something that we've been talking about recently at Camerawork, and we'll talk about it more today as well. So before we start off the panel, I just want to say a few words here. I want to thank San Francisco Camerawork advisor James Leventhal for introducing us more formally to Dr. Leigh Raiford. So thank you, James. And I also want to thank our board member, Erica Gentry, who's here tonight, who is chair of the photography department at City College of San Francisco, for pulling together this panel. San Francisco Camerawork is a nonprofit organization for all who love photography. So that's a really big tent. So while I have your attention, I want to share a few exciting matters with you. We have our biggest event of the year upcoming, which is our San Francisco Camerawork Benefit Auction 2020. This year, it's called See How Beautiful I Am. And that's in recognition of the broad range of people who identify as photographers and who we are proud to recognize. In the wake of George Floyd's killing and the desire to be the change that we want to see, we made a commitment to Black image makers at San Francisco Camerawork. Out of that, our auction theme developed, which was based on a line from a Langston Hughes poem called I Too Sing America. The goal of the auction this year is to move toward greater inclusivity and acceptance and recognition of the artist communities that make up the Bay Area. So our auction is launching September 10th, and it runs through September 25th on Artsy. We just actually released a press release today, and the auction page on Artsy is up. And you'll be seeing the artwork soon. You'll be seeing the work on Instagram, etc. Every day we'll have a new image or two that's posted on Instagram. It's really exciting. The auction is really important to us because it's how we raise money for our workshops, our artist talks, our award shows, and our member critiques. It's also how we pay our wonderful staff. It is our biggest fundraiser of the year, and we'll be showcasing, it looks like 64 works online, which is really exciting. So I'm gonna do it like hands up for that. Okay, and we will also be having talks and events leading up to the auction. This is one of them. We will also be hosting a fabulous artist showcase event on the evening of September 17th, and that's gonna be led by Adrian Burrell, who is a San Francisco Camerawork Forecast 2019 award winner. He was the juried prize winner there, so stay tuned for more. It's going to be really exciting. It's really going to showcase the artists, and the artists are actually going to host the event, and we're hoping to have as many artists as possible who are in the auction actually come and speak about their work and their practices, which is pretty exciting. So stay tuned for more about that. So now, without further ado, why you are all here is I want to introduce you to Dr. Leigh Raiford, who is going to lead off the panel. The panel will be in conversation for about 45 minutes, and then we will have some Q&A. So Dr. Leigh Raiford is an associate professor in the African American Studies Department at the University of California, Berkeley, where she teaches and researches race, gender justice, and visuality. Dr. Raiford is the author of Imprisoned in a Luminous Glare, Photography and the African American Freedom Struggle. She's the co-editor of, with Heike Rafael Hernandez, Migrating the Black Body, Visual Culture in the African Diaspora, and of with Renee Romano, The Civil Rights Movement in American Memory. Her work has appeared in numerous academic journals, including American Quarterly, Small Axe, Keeparl, History and Theory, English Language Notes, and NKA, Journal of Contemporary African Art, as well as popular venues including Art Forum, Aperture, Ms. Magazine, Atlantic, and Al Jazeera. Dr. Raiford's essays have also been included in the collections Only Skin Deep, Changing Visions of the American Self, edited by Coco Fusco and Brian Wallace, and Pictures in Progress, Early Photography and the Making of African American Identity, edited by Maurice O. Wallace and Sean Michelle Smith. In 2019, she co-curated the group shows Plumbline, Charles White at the Contemporary. Oh, sorry, let me say that again. She co-curated the group shows Plumbline, Charles White, and the Contemporary at CAM, the California African American Museum in Los Angeles with Essence Hardin, and About Things Loved, Blackness and Belonging at the Berkeley Art Museum Pacific Film Archive. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Raiford. Delphine Sims. Delphine is a PhD candidate in the history department, in the history of art department at University of California, Berkeley. In 2018, she was a curatorial intern at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art in the photography department. And previously, Delphine was a curatorial assistant at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, also in the photography department. She has worked on numerous museum exhibitions and contributed writings to several catalogs, including Looking In, Looking Out, Latin American Photography, Lori Brown, Earth Edges, and the forthcoming BAM PFA publication, New Time, Art and Feminisms in the 21st Century. And last but not least, Adrian Octavius Walker, who's really popular at Camerawork and was here a couple of weeks ago with his panel, How to Be a Black Creative. Adrian Octavius Walker is a mixed media artist based in Chicago by way of St. Louis. His work is inspired by the Black body, dynamics of the Black family, and archival work that's related to the African American experience and the untold stories that they share. Working in both film and digital format photography, Walker creates penetrating portraits influenced by deep awareness of the nuances that pervade the human experience. His greatest milestone to date is being one of the prize-winning artists in the Outwin 2019 American Portraiture Today competition, currently on display at the National Portrait Gallery Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And he's currently represented by Part 2 Gallery in Oakland, California. And I do want to say that Adrian was also a finalist in our 2019 forecast show, which is how I first had the pleasure of meeting Adrian. So with that introduction of the panelists, I'd love to turn it over to you, Dr. Raiford. Thank you so much for being here. We're really appreciative, looking forward to a great conversation. We'll talk for about 45 minutes and then we'll move into Q&A.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Michelle and Erica and everyone at SF Camerawork and James Leventhal for introducing us all. I'm really always excited to talk about photography and Blackness and the intersections often with freedom, right? For me, photography is always kind of thinking about and imagining ways of being free in the world. So Delphine, and I also want to mention that Delphine was one of the co-curators of About Things Loved last year at BAM PFA. And so I'm really excited to continue our conversations about photography. And I just also want to say, I got to be on a panel with Adrian like maybe 5 years ago in St. Louis, and have just been an admirer of his work and his thinking about photography and his commitment to community since then. So this is, just feel really fortunate that Adrian is able to was willing to participate in this conversation with us today. I'm gonna actually hand it over to Delphine, who's really like shaped our thinking about this conversation today. And we just sort of want to, I guess, think broadly about questions of Black representation, about what it means, what collectives and collaboration mean in Black image making, and then really kind of turn to some of the challenges of what it means to be a Black collective in the context of sort of ongoing anti-Blackness and white supremacy in predominantly white institutions. And part of why we're so excited to have Adrian here is to talk really openly and honestly about the C and Black collectives, I'm being nice right now, but like unfortunate encounter with the Whitney Museum. And then to bring Michelle back into the conversation for us to think collectively here today about what we can do differently particularly in SF Camerawork, and in our own communities here in the Bay Area and elsewhere. So with that, I'll turn it over to Delphine.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. We put together some slides for today because we want to look at things, right? I'm really pleased to be here and to step into the community that is SF Camerawork. So thank you all for inviting me. It's always an honor to be in conversation with Dr. Raiford, and I'm very pleased to meet Adrian. All right, here we go. Everyone can see that? All right, so to start us off, I was going to ask Leigh to really lay the broad groundwork, which is to introduce us to ways of defining and thinking about the politics of Black representation.
Yeah, so representation, I always think it's a really good place to start, to actually talk about what we mean when we say representation. Because it is, one of the sort of most fraught categories, I think, in our culture and in our politics. And so, sort of, I think historically we can think of representation, right, in two ways, right? So, representation broadly, like something standing in for something else, right? And obviously in the world of visual culture, we always think of representation as, as depictions or portrayals of a person, place, or thing, right, in the material world. But also what's important about representation is the question of, when we think of political representation, right? So thinking about the ways in which a person, an elected official, or a leader, or what have you, stands in for or speaks on behalf of another individual or community. And often those two modes of representation in the cultural field and representation in the political field, are often thought as separate and distinct. And obviously they're not, right? And I think this is, we're seeing this obviously like very explicitly and very urgently in this current moment, in the lead up to the 2020 presidential election, right? And thinking about, these, like, the sort of politics of who represents us, the kind of questions of diversity, right? And sort of like, thinking about argument, like, for example, in Kamala Harris, right? Like, the ways in which she is sort of represents a kind of cultural representation, and years of movement towards more like visible ideas about and inclusivity, but then also really what that means on the political level as well, right? So I think having to always hold, especially for Black communities, Black artists, and Black culture, holding those two definitions of representation together and in tension, right? And recognizing that that the political stakes of cultural representation and the cultural stakes of political representation are never far apart, especially when I think in the context of Black life.
Thank you. And I think we talked a few days ago, and we talked a little bit about some of the other scholars that have already done the work of initiating the ways that we talk about the politics of Black representation, right? Of course, there's your work. Pictures in Progress sort of initiates a way of thinking about that at the onset of the invention of photography. We've talked about Frederick Douglass already being engaged in that conversation. And then, of course, Stuart Hall and Bell Hooks have given really remarkable, succinct synopses of what that burden of representation is, and that duty on Black folk as image makers, and then Black folk as subject, right? Adrian, if you would like to comment on the ways that you are thinking about Black representation, I would really welcome that, what that means for your practice, and how you're thinking about other artists perhaps as well.
Right. Again, thanks for having me, y'all. For me, when it comes down to the politics of Black representation, it's all about like looking to see like who's in the room in the first place. The first thing that I do when I'm like typically hit up by any institution is to see like where my people at. You know what I'm saying? Kind of just say like fill out the room, like who's in the room, who's who, and everything. And I always want to consult with other individuals, other artists that I know in the art world about these institutions, because you know I don't know everything, and I'm not going to act and pretend like I do know everything. And we all feel that a lot of places, a lot of institutions may mean well, and they probably do, but the lack of representation is what pretty much hurt and harm a lot of folks. I'm a true believer of like, if there was representation in most places, there wouldn't be a cancel culture. You know what I'm saying? I just feel like if like a lot of these instances that happen, you know, in these institutions, in these tech spaces, I worked in tech too. So I'm like pretty much a filler in all these spaces. And it's just like being a representation of like Blackness and Black people and everything. And then like being a part of these spaces and then walking into them and seeing like the only person that looked like me is me. It's uncomfortable, and also at the same time it gets tiring. But at the same time, I feel like it gives me that push to level up who I am and what I represent, and also speak my piece. Even though if I may be alone, at the same time, I don't look at myself as an odd person out. You know what I'm saying? I'm honestly looking at that room. It's just kind of like, this is y'all fault, you know? And I know we're going to get into this like with spaces and places like the Whitney, but like thinking about what happened earlier this year or at SF MoMA, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, silencing Black women and stuff like that. You know, this was a particular person that I'm not going to name drop or anything. If you heard about it, you heard about it. If you haven't, just look it up. You know, like them speaking on something they believe in and then they get silenced afterwards. It just kind of doesn't make any sense, and it's just not a good look for these places. And I feel like as a Black artist, it's not like we're looking to take over these spaces. It's honestly looking to like, and not necessarily like protect them, but it's like want to be a part of what's happening in these spaces, but at the same time being also understood. I think that's kind of like where I'm at with it. And I mean, SF Camerawork, I feel like might be like that one place that just get it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like the tea that y'all drinking on or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, it's just like the representation at these spaces or whatnot, I feel like colleagues and everybody should lean on one another. You know what I'm saying? Don't be afraid to call out something that you see is wrong. You know, and I also think like when it comes down to allyship, that's part of the job. You know what I'm saying? To call out what you see is wrong, especially when you don't see that representation there. And also kind of like knowing like and understanding if you're gonna like try to do some work that isn't a representation of you, you know, before like just trying to just study and look up words and like, you know, the dictionary and all this type of stuff, kind of just hit up like Leigh or somebody, just hit up Michelle, somebody, or ask like these questions, or ask these people. It's just like, hey, is this okay? You know what I'm saying? And it's not like we're gonna like lay the law down on you or nothing like that. It's just mostly like just kind of like educate, you know what I'm saying? And then just kind of like bring it to a place where it needs to be, and probably bring in some people that actually know like what's up.
Mm-hmm. I just want to, it's funny because like I realize like I can only see you, Adrian, on my screen, and I don't know if you can see me, but I'm like nodding, affirming, laughing, and like one of the things, two things I want to, one thing I want to say, one question, right? I think one of the important things lessons I've learned and I've been taught over and over by my family members and my mentors is, you know, when, you know, as you said, you walk into the room and you look who's around, and, you know, I've learned to not trust the person who wants to be who's the only one in the room and likes it that way, right? The only one of whoever they may be, right? And they're cool with that. That's like, that's a red flag, right?
Red flag.
And so thinking about, right, like, and so I think so much about the importance of the collectivity and of bringing other people in is, you know, one, like you said, to share that burden, to not be exhausted, right? To not necessarily always be established as the singular voice or the authority, you know, and in some ways I've been, we're back at teaching, so I've been reading a lot of Barbara Christian, the Black feminist scholar from UC Berkeley, and so much what she talks about is like, you know, doing the work so that we don't feel crazy, right? But that brings me to another question about something you said and about what it means then when you find yourself in the position of being, you know, being one of the few, and in so many, and right, you said in so many of the locations you've been that, you know, the 0.7%, right, of Black folks or you know, whatever that number is, and the kind of burden of representation that places on you as an artist specifically. And you mentioned saying that you wanted to level up the kind of work that you make. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about what that has meant for your practice specifically, because historically, so many Black artists have felt aesthetically and artistically constrained by exactly that burden of representation. Artists, activists, Black folks moving in the world, right? But what is that, how do you navigate a sense of responsibility in your individual practice and in your aesthetics, if that makes sense?
Right. I mean, you know, it's kind of funny you asked it, because like even today, before any talk, I like always do these, like, I just drive just to kind of clear my head. And I had this thought about, first and foremost, I didn't get on Twitter. I got on Twitter for like a second today because I didn't want to see what happened in the world today, because I know something happened, but I don't know what happened. But then my second thought was thinking about my practice and also the work that I am creating and what I want to create and what I'm tired of creating. And I think I'm tired of often creating work around us struggling and dealing with all of what's happening. You know what I'm saying? It's not really bringing me any peace, internal peace. And I also just kind of get exhausted by creating this type of work to help and explain others how and what, you know, things should be, and how, like, thinking about the We Matter work behind me. Like, this work was done in 2018. And I'll be honest, it's kind of like I'm like getting tired of like showing it. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, yeah, my most popular work, but at the same time, it's like, as more and more I tell this story and us not being looked at as a threat, being Black men and representation is just Black people, the work is not just about Black men. It's called We Matter. I photographed Black men, but we Matter is a representation of all of us. And, you know, just like Breonna Taylor or anybody that has been looked at as a threat, you know what I'm saying? For me, it's starting to hurt thinking about this work and what it actually means. And the fact that the stuff is still happening in the world, you know what I'm saying? So for me, it's kind of like getting to the point where I want to create work that kind of is like directed towards these things that are happening in a way of it's like a slap in the face, you know, but it's just kind of like figuring it out. And I don't really know. I'm like, honestly, like at a art mental roadblock right now with like knowing what I want to create next because of actually what's happening in the world. And so it's kind of like taking a step back from like creating and actually just like reading, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Looking up historical references and stuff like that. Looking into like actual modern day lynchings and like how we are living in modern day lynchings right now. Like everything is so public and so fast and often happening, which is why it's just like me staying away from like social media as much, you know what I'm saying, or wanting to. And so like kind of honestly, that's where I'm at. Like, I'm at like a mental roadblock of like knowing what's happening. And I'll be honest, like one of the biggest blessings right now for me is personally not working in the tech world right now. You know, it's like I don't know where I would be mentally working in the tech world and having to answer those same questions, like, you know, the how are you feeling? Is there anything that I can do? Like those long drawn out emails and stuff like that, you know, it just kind of like having that burden, that feeling of like, you don't even understand that me walking out this door and making it to work was a part of the progress or process, you know what I'm saying? So it's just kind of like being here right now, even right like in this space is kind of like a drag for me. So it's just like, yeah, I'm kind of like just at this mental block right now with learning. And then also with you like name dropping, I'm like literally trying to take notes on both that you're dropping so I can like pick up and read. Cause like I said in the earlier stages of this conversation, like I don't know everything. And I don't want to sit here and act like I do know everything, but at the same time, I want to learn as much as I can to help me move forward with my practice.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I feel like if one thing that this, you know, 2020 has like at least impressed upon me, is it like the need to be still in some moments, right? Like to, you know, make time to stare out my window, and to find my breath. And I think it's like, you know, one of the, and to study. And so I think my, like, you know, I'm looking at your work and the kind of, you know, and yeah, I do, I speak as an academic, right? But like thinking of Christina Sharp's book In the Wake, and she talks about work that is, you know, aspirational, like work that, meaning that it puts breath back into the Black body. And I feel like, you know, your work does that, right? And that's a different kind of representation or conversation than, you know, so-called positive images or so-called like, you know, like nuance of the, you know, it shows Blackness in a complicated light, right? And I think that's like kind of a certain, it's a kind of a limited way, obviously, of thinking about the work, but, you know, something that brings breath and light back into, you know, like into our bodies and into our thinking is so much, I feel like is what I find myself really drawn to. And sometimes I think that can only, it can happen, it sometimes happens best, right, in, you know, in conversation, with, you know, in conversation and with others, right, and with other folks. And so I guess I'm thinking specifically about like how a collective like Kamoinge could create many, such a vast body of very different kinds of work around Blackness, in part because, you know, like the Studio Museum, they said they took Blackness as the ground, right? You know, without having to explain it, right? And so that there's a way in which they could, you know, in that kind of shared experience of Blackness, they could be, you know, they were allowed to kind of be distinct and be, you know, and be different. I'm seeing Irina Dugan, I think, in the among the participants, who's written really beautifully about about Kamwenge. But I don't know, Delphine, do you want to offer anything about Kamwenge or other historic collectives?
I think maybe we can sort of ask one another, what does collectivity mean for us? What does the collective offer? And I'm really taken with what Adrian first started with, was who's in the room with me. And I feel like Black collectives are to foreground that I'm in the room of people that I have sharedness with, that allow me to escape, but also can engage with you around the things that might have to be unspoken. Like, I am hurting today, and there's that shared recognition. And that's what the warmth of those spaces offer, and why there's the need for collectivity. So there's the sense that there's a void, and there's sort of an isolation in the predominantly white art institution spaces. So why do collectives form? It's so that we can share that burden, but also spend time in the utopia that is just amongst other Black folk. And I think that sharedness is really foundational, but also it allows for sort of a proliferation of difference. Like, there's a shared, we are Black, but that Black is multitudinous, right? And it's sort of like fractures in many different ways we can think about how Black photographers are engaging with photography also. And I, like Adrian, have obviously felt a lot of weight and sadness this summer. And it really made me think about my community, who I'm in, who I would say I'm in the collectivity with, right? And that's really sort of what spearheaded this idea of turning to collectivism. So you're not alone anymore, truly. And Kamwenge is really the groundwork there, starting in the 1960s, and being committed to sharing and being together. I have to note that the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts is actually having a symposium right now, crossover with ours, that is dedicated to Kamwenge, long overdue. But yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about Kamwenge, but if you or Adrian, Leigh, want to talk about how you define collectivism as well, we can go in that direction.
I can speak on that, definitely. I'm a part of a collective in the Bay, formerly known as Black Male Collective, but now we're Nerd Collective. And I didn't, before living in the Bay Area, I'll be honest, as far as the word collective and community, I didn't really truly know the definition of either one of those words until I moved to Oakland and saw and found what collectivity means in having a community, a space where you can kind of just share whatever, where you don't have to be forced to know everything. You can learn stuff from individuals. A good friend of mine, their name is Yatunde in the Bay. I don't know if y'all know Yatunde, Alawaju. Her work is freaking insane. Their work is freaking insane. And I learned a lot from them personally, just from conversation. And all of us as a whole, we kind of just go through our own thing. Like, I was the only one. Well, it's two of us out of collective that work in tech. Everybody else is like art, super art every day, 3 jobs a day, struggling, crying, everything. And we're just kind of like all together in this together. And no matter if we are collectively in a show together, we're still like collectively talking and having these conversations and just having each other's back. And I think for me, that's what collectivity means. And like also coming from a space of never having that is something that I don't ever want to like not have. And when it comes down to community, and one of the things where I preach on when it comes down to community, is just like to help people or just bring people in spaces where they probably thought they would never end up, including myself. me being in tech was like unheard of, you know. Like I said this like what 3 weeks ago when I was on here with SF Camerawork, like having free lunch in a space and all this access. It's like, hell yeah, I want to bring my friends in and see this and get that. You know what I'm saying? Like, why not? You know, because I may not have it ever again. So I want them to get a piece of it too. And so it's just like being the beacon and the person that can like actually do that, and just like it's no thing. It's like I'm not missing out on anything, and I'm not trying to show off while I'm working. You know, I'm honored to be in this space. And also, like I said in the earlier stages to earlier parts of the conversation, like waking up and making it to the space. You know, it's a lot that we have to think about as Black people. You know, I honestly think about that every day when I'm walking out the house, you know what I'm saying? Because we're constantly reminded that we can't go out on a run. We can't play in the playground. We can't do the things that we normally want to do. You know, so like being able to share that space and like having a collective and having that community to do it with, you know, for me, and then seeing like a photograph like this, it's just like, why not continue that? You know what I'm saying? In a place like the Underground Museum, like that's literally my favorite place in Los Angeles, California.
Me too. Me too.
I pull up and I go to the Underground, you know, because like you go outside, you're inside, like it doesn't matter what's going on, like being in the bookstore. I legit buy something every time I go to that place, like every time. And like the Noah Davis shirt right now that definitely has on, I was like, dang, they didn't have my size. I bought it anyway. You know, like, why not? You know, so just like that's collectivity. You know what I'm saying? Being a part of something and then just like a representation of that space. I honestly feel like I'm not a board member of the Underground Museum, but like in spirit, I'm like a board member of this place. I love it that much. You know what I'm saying? Like, so like having those spaces and like it represents like you, and you walk into this space, and then that's not like forget like the Jamaican spot right on the corner.
Yes.
Yes, every time.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like it just makes sense. You're gonna go to the Underground Museum, you're gonna go get something to eat, you know, at the spot like right on the corner. So like that's kind of like where I'm at with, you know, collectivity and just having ownership of space and being a part of like space and community.
Yeah. Wow. No, I mean, everything that you're both saying is so powerful. And I guess the model that I hold on to for collectivity, or one of the models, is the beloved community, is SNCC's beloved community, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And this idea that everyone, you show up, you know, and you give what you have when you can. You are a space where you can bring your best self, and you have something to contribute, no matter, you know, how seemingly small or, you know, insignificant it may be, but it is, and if you don't, and are, you know, in the space, and sorry, like for another, like, you know, if you just are gonna, you know, you can play the tambourine, right? That is, you're welcome there. And this, you know, and that we actually can become better and become stronger with others. And I feel like, you know, so much of, you know, the culture that, of like USian culture is so clearly not, it's so geared towards individualism, obviously, that we actually don't know, I think we actually don't get to be our best selves, right? We get to we end up emerging as very poor versions, right, of who we are. And so I think, you know, the sort of the beloved community, the collectivism and community and mutual aid and community projects of the Black Panthers, right? Like these are, you know, those models. And at the same time, I think what's also important are the sort of, you know, the notion that I think what you're both talking about too is that the way that that community and collectives hold us and see us even when we're not our best selves, right? Regardless of our productivity, right? Whether we're making or not, right? That part of the collective as well is just, right? Is, you know, is to be held, right? I think in a certain way. And then I think also the thing too is that it's, you know, wanting to hold on to the idea that it's an ongoing practice, right? That it's not, you know, and that it's not easy, right? Because I think we do want to think about the sort of utopic aspects of all of, you know, of community, collectivity, collaboration, but they're also, you know, there are also challenges and problematics, right? I mean, even just looking at the image of Kamoinge, right? I mean, Ming Smith is the only woman in this image, right? And thinking about, you know, even, for example, the SNCC photography agency was really actively dissuaded women from taking up the camera and move them into administrative work rather than creative work. And so also thinking about the ways in which the collective is also a kind of practice, right? It's a practice for, and an opportunity. I mean, I think one of the things you said earlier, Adrian, is about cancel culture, right? Like, or about canceling. And it's like, if people were in the room, right, we'd have less of canceling. And I think it's also about, like, you know, creating the space where people have the grace to fail and then try again.
I like that notion of how we can think about the collective as a process, a practice, and inevitably failing at times, because the way that Kamoinge living members are talking about it is saying it's like a family. And obviously, when you say that, there's the reality that there's continual love, and that's the foundation, but there are going to be problems. And it's about how you're constantly working through those problems, but returning to one another. And I just really love that sense of collectivity. And I understand it. The way I'm thinking about it is the potential for thinking collectivity via intimacy. And as you've said with SNCC, it's about not only are we going to be in shared space to think philosophically together, to learn together, but I'm going to feed you, I'm going to house you, I got your back. Like, you may be unsupported by a broader art world, you may not be getting the funds, but I will give you the camera if and when you need it. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Whitney, because artists need funds right now, right? And grateful to SF Camerawork for being an institution that's committed to funding artists and supporting them, because when the other parts of the art world aren't doing so, collectivity is the space where Black artists are surviving, right? Yeah.
Maybe this is a good time, Adrian, to talk. You could talk a little bit about the collectives you've been part of, and about Seeing Black.
Right. Yeah. So for those who don't know, Seeing Black started by a few photographers: Joshua Kissy, Micaiah Carter, Photo Dre, and New York. And basically, the photographs that we, as a collective, like, they reached out to a bunch of artists across from men, women, trans, all over across the board, all Black. And we each submitted a photo, and the photos, the money went towards an organization. So here are the Seeing Blacks: Joshua Kishi, Danny, Andre, Florin, Anthony, and all of the money that was collected, I can't say the number, but it was a nice number, went to Black organizations. And so I didn't get the email, and I didn't know what was going on until I saw a good friend of mine, Kennedy Carter. She goes by Internet Baby on Instagram, and Kennedy is really loud on the internet. She's young and loud, and it's really, really great. But she was like going off about like the Whitney, and basically talking about like, you know, she got this email from a curator that not asked, but told her that she was going to be a part of this exhibition taking place at the Whitney featuring photographs from the Seeing Black project. And it was very, very odd because it was just like, well, first and foremost, these photos are like $100. They're not even the official prints like of like our work. So it's like the full representation of the work, but it's really great to have. And especially going towards a Ferris is the name of the curator, going towards these organizations. So as a institution like the Whitney, who would purchase these photos and then just like, oh, we're gonna have a museum show with this work, it was just like, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't even surprised at this type of culture vulturing work of art that they did. What they did was like a representation of like a cheap loophole into trying to give back and like, you know, put photographers inside of an institution without consent. You know what I'm saying? It's like, especially off like, you know, you want to have our work in the museum, you know, you pay full price for that work, you know, or at least have like the, you know, the audacity to hit us up properly and asking like, is that okay? Or the people who started like Seeing Black from the jump. And so for me, it was just like, I don't know, like for me, before doing something like this, it's like, I wanted to think like Ferris, the curator, to think like, if they work in an institution like the Whitney, didn't they just see what happened at SF Camerawork? I mean, not SF Camerawork, sorry. Y'all like, oh my God, no. What happened at SF MoMA? You know what I'm saying? And it's just like who's in the room? Back to who's in the room. You know what I'm saying? Like, who did Ferris talk to say that's a great idea? Because that's what I want to know. Like, who approved Ferris? Or did Ferris just like overrule everybody? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of like what I want to know. It's almost like I wish that we had like cameras in a room or some type of like device to like, you can hear these conversations happen. And then it's like, that's a great idea. Let's just do a show and they're going to be happy. You know, no, that's not what it is. Now you got to go through all of this clapback, you know what I'm saying? Which is going to, now nobody's going to like trust you. And also people who have been in the Whitney, you making them look bad as, because you all know American artists, right? Mm-hmm. American artists, they have work at the Whitney right now. So to imagine like what that current work speaks on, it's like, did you all pay attention to the exhibition by American artists and then to go back and see what you all just did? It kind of just doesn't play out, and it's not math at all. It doesn't seem really, really hard to like grasp like what you're doing is wrong, you know? And I think them being called out and then them also like, I don't know if they understood. And also it's just like, because the show is not happening, but also just kind of like learning from that, you know what I'm saying? Has Ferris sat down and have a conversation with any of the artists one-on-one and apologize? You know, like a apology out at large is cool, but like an apology one-on-one is also something, because a conversation can happen and a lot of learnings can happen from that conversation. And I'm just honestly glad I didn't get an email, because I don't know what I would have. I probably wouldn't be here talking to y'all right now, because I would have had to form like a whole squad to go to New York and, you know, shut the Whitney down, because it's just kind of like it doesn't make sense for a space to, you know, do something on that level, you know, especially on the level of where they stand. And I honestly look at that as that's a privilege. That was a privileged act to do amongst the institution with the name, you know, to think like, okay, we're gonna get by with this because our name is we are the Whitney. And I think like I honestly felt really empowered after that, because it goes to show us like these institutions, like I said 3 weeks ago here at SF Camerawork, these institutions need us way more than we need them. And I think as long as we preach that and put that out there to the world, then I feel like we'll be okay as artists. You know, we don't have to take these opportunities all the time. You know, we don't have to always honestly have these conversations all the time, because we have these conversations with each other. You know what I'm saying? It's the other people in the room that need to understand and hear these conversations, because it's almost like I can record myself and press play and have this conversation again and again and again and again. But it's just like, is it sitting with these individuals who keep doing these acts? That's the question. You know what I'm saying? Is it sitting? And if not, why isn't it sitting? What is it going to take for it to sit with these folks in these high places to understand?
I wanted to, Delphine said something really incredible. Well, we were talking about this the other day, before we kind of like shift to the, you know, the role of the institutions. I also want to talk about like the power of what these, the collectives, you know, fundraising through selling the work means for opening up the world of collecting to folks who, right, who, and I think that's also, because, and that's, I mean, you know, we've been talking about collectives, right? But like also the form, like what collecting means and who gets to collect.
It's very
right?
scary. It's, I can like just really quick, like it's hard for me sometimes to sell my work to certain people. It's almost like I want to have like a background check, because this whole flipping culture, like how they do in sneakers, people are doing it with art now, you know? And it's just like to see like this amazing work by a Chanel Stone or Adrian or Yatunde or Junebug or anybody out there. It's just like they see a price on that work. And that's why we question ourselves when it comes down to pricing our work so low. Because if we price our work at a certain price point and then this specific type of person buys the work, it's like thinking like, why did this white man with this bright orange shirt with this bow tie buy a piece of my work with a man with a do-rag on? Like, what is he gonna do? Is he gonna put this in his living room for real? And if he does, will he be able to explain what this work actually means to the people that come into his household? So it's been plenty of time for me just like, no, you can't buy the work. And I think like having power there also in like in control of who owns your work is something, because, you know, money is good. Rent is due every month. You know what I'm saying? Mortgage is due every month. But at the same time, like the power of ownership and the power of no, you know what I'm saying? And knowing how to say no and who has the rights to own your work speaks more volume to me. And I'm super sorry for cutting you off, but it's just kind of like, because I have these conversations, it's really scary to sell work. As much as we want to make money as artists, I know I can only speak for myself. it's also scary to sell it to certain individuals, you know? And I take pride for the work that I collected, you know what I'm saying? And I feel like as a young person who's looking to be a collector, an aspiring collector, like I own a lot of work and I'm like proud of it, you know what I'm saying? I want to keep that going. But at the same time, I do want to sell my work also. And that's why I like being an artist, a curator, and everything else. I want to preach to my fellow photographers out there that collecting work and artist work is also important as well as making the work too, because that just circulates. At least that's how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
I was like shaking with enthusiasm when I saw See in Black come together. I think there's a certain amount of collectivity on social media, but like I, being an art historian, like want the physical print. I constantly want that engagement with the artwork in person, obviously missing museums and their ability to offer that. And I cannot afford to be a collector most of the time. So I just couldn't believe that there was this incredible coalition of photographers dedicated to sharing with the world, but also committed to thinking about fund distribution, and that I got to take part in that, and that I now get to live with these artworks, right? It was like a huge moment for me. And I think that's really about the ability to sit with Black representation too. As Leigh mentioned, like the opportunity to be still with your work, Adrian, or someone else's, to just see it on your wall. Leigh has a photograph behind her now. What that means for a daily encounter with something that you love and care about. And I also, I was surprised that the Whitney managed to fail so quickly. I could imagine seeing it later, but the fact that it happened so fast was really surprising to me. Because I think this is a moment, again, Leigh is always saying it correctly, we need to be still. Why is there a hustle right now on the Whitney's part, especially when it's a moment of listening and learning and reading? Why do you need to respond so quickly to work that Black artists, Black activists have been committed to for a long time, and you haven't duly represented in your museum already? So I could talk more about that, but I just really want to foreground the fact that this was like a pivotal moment in like a 20-something-year-old's ability to live with Black art. And I'm deeply disappointed that there's the potential that that was ruined. But so incredibly grateful to the artists for offering this to us.
Because it's actually scary to want to do this again. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like scary. It's just like, as much as like, you know, a lot of galleries survive off of having these forecasted shows and stuff like that. And, you know, like, that's kind of like their bread and butter. So for a place like the Whitney, and then institutions like SF Camerawork, it's like you look at these folks and be like, you should be setting a better example, you know, as an institution of your size and like what you have done in the past. So that's kind of like where the confusion comes from. It's just like, are you doing this again because of your name? You know, like you being who you are and, you know, how long you've been around? Or it's just like you really just don't know. You just didn't think. You know, it's either or. It just kind of, neither one of them. You know, you kind of got to backtrack on yourself and just like really think about it, like moving forward, because I hope that these other institutions look and really pay attention. It's just like to understand like this can't keep happening. And again, it kind of goes into like what's happening in the day-to-day world with the police and all these different lynchings that's happening. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, didn't you just see the news of what just happened? Like now you're going to be on TV, and it's we just like rolled our eyes. It's like it is a roll your eyes type of moment, because it's just like you're not learning. It's like this past June, this Juneteenth was the most poppin' Juneteenth in history. And then we went right back to square one, you know what I'm saying? Just that fast. You know, we take off of work, we celebrate that. You know what I'm saying? Like, was that the only thing to celebrate? Was just taking off of work? Did you actually learn anything? Are you learning anything? And I think that's kind of like where the question always lays for me. It's just like ultimately like learning.
And learning doesn't happen quickly, right?
Nope.
I mean, that's like the rush, right? I think what you were saying, Delphine, like just the rush of this, right? But maybe this is a good moment to bring Michelle into the conversation and to think of, you know, to think about what it means for you, Michelle, to be a Black woman leading this organization at this moment, and how and how an institution, a long-running institution, has and can do differently, right? And do better.
Yeah, for sure. Again, thank you all for being here, and thanks for asking for my perspective. You know, it's been a really interesting time, to say the least, just in terms of what's happening politically within the United States, which is the context in which we're in now, which is so critical. The one thing I'll say is that I'm involved in a number of different organizations and boards, and so I've actually been learning across organizations. I'm really involved in the theater world as well, with organizations and individuals who are involved in anti-racism, and so I've been learning kind of across channels, if that makes sense, from organizations that are real leaders. And so oftentimes I'm also kind of, you know, taking my cues and also talking with the board about what I'm seeing in other instances and other organizations and how they're leading. So actually, let me say, you know, one person who I have a lot of respect for is Nataki Garrett, who is the artistic director at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. If you don't know her, you should definitely check her out. And it's interesting, you know, in the theater world, I'll come back to museums and art galleries as well. But I think there's a really interesting synergy between organizations right now in terms of artists. And in this case, we're talking about visual artists. But in the theater world, they're performing artists, you know, who are writers, you know, actors, dancers, you know, people organizing and acting collectively. And, you know, I've been fortunate to be involved with Nataki, and then also Dominique Morisseau, who is a MacArthur genius. And, you know, to hear their words and hear how they're thinking about the theater and how it needs to respond. I don't know if people have seen the Dear White American Theater letter with its 31 pages of policy prescriptions. Some people call them demands. I like to call them policy recommendations for what organizations can be doing. And I think there's a way in which that kind of, we can all look at that and translate that into our own institutions in some ways. And that document is based on the lived experience of people in the theater world, people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color. So that all has been very instructive for me. I say that kind of in the beginning, like learning from organizations, so other organizations and other people who are experiencing this moment as well. I will say, you know, Delphine, so what you said really resonates. I put it in the chat, but I didn't quote you on it. But, you know, it's a moment for listening, learning, and reading before people kind of leap in and try to engage. So, you know, I've been in that space as well. And, you know, I have been really trying to listen to artists and hear what they are saying and what they're saying to San Francisco Camerawork, which is really important. So that's why I'm so happy that you're all here today to talk with us. You know, one of the questions I've been trying to figure out is how not to be the vessel for the change. Of course, you know, I want to make changes and do the right thing, but it can't only lie with me. And we're talking about a collective. So, you know, how is it that we work together in the San Francisco Camerawork communities, how to work with the full board so that they can actually hear what it is that artists are saying and what it is that curators are saying, and have those information, those experiences come to us, but in a safe way. And that, you know, because I feel like, you know, artists are relying on us, and it's a responsibility. I feel like artists are relying on us, and they are being very brave in sharing their work and their experiences with us. So how do we respect that? You know, with this auction that we have, which I'm really excited about, you know, See How Beautiful I Am. You know, it was really a collective project. you know, with our auction committee. Jean Dominique had just left, but, you know, he's on our board as well, and he's an artist. Rodney Ewing is actually part of this as well. He's, you know, one of the founding members of 3.9 Collective. So as we, you know, have thought about how to put the auction together, we actually reached out first with an idea of radical inclusivity, and really partnered with James Leventhal, who had been at MOAD, Museum of African Diaspora, on this. So how do we have this vision of radical inclusivity and actually start there, and start first there, and ask artists to join us? And I feel like artists are really kind of putting their trust with us, and their reputations with us. And my question is, how do we keep this going, right? So what happens next? You know, we're talking about the auction. We're talking about the See in Black benefit and how that work then went to, you know, Whitney curators, right, acquired cheaply. You know, we have a benefit to raise money for camera work and also for artists. How do we make sure that we do right by the artists, and make sure that those voices are included? And then kind of going forward, you know, what does this look like? So, because what I hear is that this can't be just kind of a one-time commitment. You know, all the support that we're receiving, how do we give back and remain inclusive and actually become more inclusive? Because I don't, you know, I'm talking about remaining, I don't want to make any assumptions. We need to think about what the future looks like and how we can get better and be a better partner. I hope that's helpful. And so, I mean, that's kind of where my, you know, that's where my head is at in terms of my own thinking.
Definitely, 100%.
Thank you. I think this is a good time to open it up to questions and audience conversation. Excuse me. And I'm not sure how.
Yeah, I guess they can type it in, or
yeah, if you type it, yeah.
or something like that, whatever.
Oh yeah, and thank you. So thank you for that, Dr. Raiford. I can help to moderate as well. So if people have questions, please add them to the chat, and we're happy to take them. In the meantime, I'll vamp a little bit and just kind of read from the chat. And you know, people are saying that, you know, thank you for creating a space to have this important dialogue, and people are very appreciative of the honesty here that's been expressed. Because I do think that there's a vulnerability to this work that has to be acknowledged.
I have a question for SF Camerawork. What have you all learned as an institution, a small institution in the Bay Area, and thinking like, all right, you know, like when these things happen, do you all have conversations like instantly? Do you sleep on it? Like, what is the process, you know, for an institution like SF Camerawork when stuff in the art world happens like that? You know, is it something that you all act on, just like kind of have a discussion around? Like, what's your process?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You know, formally, what kind of conversations do we have? We've certainly been having conversations at the board level. We certainly, you know, we have an annual retreat every year. And so one of the things that we've been talking about at our annual retreat is thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, although, you know, that's really not far enough. Anti-racism is, you know, what we're talking about today, and cultures of belonging. What that means, we're talking about education, and how that works, and, you know, how to educate ourselves. So these are conversations that are happening at every board meeting, you know, making sure that we're having training and that kind of thing. But, you know, training is not enough, and we need to continue to take action, I would say, you know, to address these issues. But, you know, let me go back to the letter that I wrote, right? So I made a commitment to Black image makers. Chanel Stone, who is here, posted something on our Instagram feed, you know, saying, you know, camera work, you know, in the wake of George Floyd's killing, I want to hear more, you know, what's going on? How are you guys thinking? Right. And I can tell you a little bit about that process. For sure, I have been thinking about it and wanting to reach out. We're trying to have conversations internally about kind of, you know, how we want to respond. And then Chanel posted. So, and then we were going to post one thing, and then she posted something to us. And so we wanted to, and that was probably almost immediately after some of the issues at SF MoMA. And so, you know, there was no way we were going to edit anything that Chanel said, you know, just being kind of sensitive to that. Plus, you know, she's an artist who we really respect. You know, Chanel was a winner, or, you know, one of the finalists in our Forecast 2019 juried show. and we have a relationship with Chanel, so we want to take that seriously. And also people like Amir, who I see here, and Charles Lee as well, had responded. So we wanted to take that really seriously. So that's why I wrote the letter and actually incorporated the language from Chanel's post to actually respond and talk about the things that we were already doing and what we wanted to do in the future. I had definitely noticed, you know, we were having talks and some programming, and I wanted to, you know, jump on immediately to the programming to address the killings, and also to address the protests and what I thought that they signified in terms of a positive sense and a sense of positive change. You know, at that time, you know, with everyone coming out together and protesting for change, I was like, wow, the tide is really turning, and let's really think about what this means, what this moment means. And so it was important for me to come on to this kind of programming to talk about that, especially because, you know, in the wake of COVID-19 also, we see the disproportionate impact on people of color, especially Black and brown people. So I wanted to start introducing that and acknowledging that we are living in a context and that, you know, that we're living in a context, and this is not just a time for artists to kind of, you know, have a creative time, you know, and take some time off and be alone, you know, during COVID-19. It's not like a, you know, an art practicum, if that makes any sense. You know, artists of color are really experiencing a difficult and troubling time. So I wanted to acknowledge that I saw that. And so I felt the need to myself respond. And the board was supportive and work with the board on this going forward.
Michelle, I think Chanel might want to chime in. She mentioned that in her chat.
I could speak on the question with Chanel because I was the one who mentioned Chanel's name. Now, what I was saying, Chanel, basically, it wasn't about like your price and what your work. I was saying as a collective, and I saw that you were on, and as a person that admires your work or whatnot, just talking about how us artists or whatever, we have these conversations about pricing or whatever. I'm saying we shouldn't be afraid of pricing our work for whatever prices we are pricing it for, but also just like being protective of who we are selling our work to. That's just not mentioning you. That's just like anybody out there or whatnot when it comes down just to selling the work. Because for me personally, I am afraid sometimes of selling my work to certain individuals. And also it's just like knowing like, oh, I sold this work for this amount, knowing that this particular person could resell it for this amount. And it's just kind of like having these conversations like with a big brother of mine and a big sister is a collective by the name of Work Play out of St. Louis. That happened to them when they sold some work, and a big time collector in St. Louis collected their work. And now this work is being on tours, it's all over the freaking place. And it's also being like price pointed at different prices and stuff like that. And it was resold. And they didn't see or hear about it until a friend saw the work in the show in Rochester. You know, they didn't even know that the work was like floating around like how it was. So it's just kind of like, once the work is sold, it's just like what do we have to do? It's just like put like a QR code device on it or something like that to track it down, like some type of tracker. And it's just kind of like, not knowing. I'm afraid of the unknown after the work is gone. That's kind of like how I feel. It's like this part of me is like gone with that sale. I got some money, but at the same time, like a part of me is also gone, you know? So that's kind of like where I'm at with that.
I really love that you speak to that, Adrian, because I think as I'm talking to more living artists, there's a lot more well, I'm in my 20s, so I haven't talked to living artists for that long, but there's a lot of conscientiousness around how they're selling their works and who they want to live with their works. And it's such a beautiful sense of control and obviously very complex, but I think it's really critical that we're having these conversations about where the art will live. And of course, in a world where so much requires policy making, it's really fascinating and like hard to grasp the complications around what it means for artists not to be able to get funds when their works are resold.
Right.
And it's just really gross to think about that exploitation. And of course, that it's going to be happening in very painful and consistent ways to Black and POC and Indigenous artists specifically.
Right. Yeah, I just don't want to see it as just like a token of a price, and mostly just kind of seeing that's like a honor of like owning the work and actually caring. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of like, that's what any artist out there, especially the ones that are living, you know, because I say it all the time. I don't want to be the artist when I pass on. That's when I'm gonna get popping. You know what I'm saying? Like, why didn't you see that when I was alive? You know, when I was literally talking to you about the work, like we had a conversation, and then it's just like you got to go back, and it's just like, oh, I see a price point on the work. It's like when Leigh Raiford died. You know, they committed suicide, RIP. You know, a couple of years ago. I own their book, and the first thing I saw, or first thing I thought of was like, let me go see how much this book is now, because the book was priced at like $60 or something like that. You go on eBay, it's like going for like thousands of dollars and stuff like that. It's kind of like heartbreaking, you know what I'm saying, to see like, is this what you see? You know what I'm saying? You see a price tag on my work now that I'm gone. You know what I'm saying? You want to flip it. You know, you want to sell it off to make an income. You know, I one time, like my book, my publication, My Lens Eye Ferguson, somebody put it on Amazon. I didn't even know you can put stuff on Amazon to resell it. But it was like on Amazon for like $150, and it was like a $40 book. So it was like, this is weird. You know, like just thinking about this. It's just kind of like being a part of that. It's just like, it's always some room for discussion there, and just kind of like wanting to know like, what could we do as a collective, as artists, homies and stuff like that, to like really get together and see like, is it something that we can do about this, you know, and not have that selling work anxiety, you know?
And
Yeah.
it seems, oh, go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, actually, well, if you wanted to say something, please go ahead. I also just wanted to note that James Leventhal has raised his hand and wanted to say a few words, but it might be, I want to make sure that we're staying on track with what Adrian was saying, and you had a comment, Dr.
Sure.
Raiford.
No, I just was thinking also, Natalie, in the comments about the sort of thinking about, right, in which payoffs are not competitive, but rather cooperative. And I think, you know, one of the things that we need to also be thinking about are not just artist collectives, but collector collectives, and the ways in which the kinds of the spaces where the art ends up, right, are also, they're also going into communities of care and value, right, as well. And I think that's another way we can think about our kind of community responsibilities to artists, that it's, you know, not just about like the ways in which we think about the work, we interact with the work, we can consume and support the work, but the ways that we also provide kind of ongoing context and, you know, and longevity. And then, yeah, I'll hand it off to James.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, right on. I was just going to say something more when it was flowing earlier, where I just wanted to say thank you in a way to the panelists and also to Michelle for mentioning my name in the process, and just wanted to thank the panelists too, namely in terms of coming to understand the potentiality of the role of people who can work as accomplices. Not so much allies, but partners in crime. And I sort of now feel apologetic that I've started to open my mouth, because I've spent a lot of my professional life not being seen. But I did want to just say thank you for the acknowledgements, and then also for some of the other beautiful people who are in the room, Seth, the critic, and other folks, Colony Little, Chanel Stone, Amir Sadiq, some of the folks who had already been called out, who are sort of embracing this process of change. And just to say that, like, really, like, the thing that actually made me want to raise my hand was that there was a scholar today who got called out as actually misrepresenting herself as being somebody who was Afro-Latina and had built a career around that. And one of the things that was a lesson for me was hearing that and to realize that, like, maybe I do kind of play a role that where I should acknowledge the fact that I am working as a partner in crime to try and promote the culture. And that is a significant and meaningful role that can be played. And that if you, in the same way as a reflection of what Dr. Raiford was saying earlier, of being suspicious of people who are happy to be the only person in the room, I'm suspicious similarly of people who feel comfortable when everybody looks like them in the room, because it's not the best way to get things done. And indeed, the kind of things that you all are talking about collectivity, the messages that come out of Oakland, what we learn from the Black Panther, what we learn from the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement started as a decentralized movement that has taken over the globe, and it all started in Oakland. There's something very special about this place. There's something very special about the Bay Area. So I just wanted to say that, and I hope that's all right. And it's mainly by way of saying thank you all for embracing this process and this power of collectivity and partnership. And Michelle, I also just want to take a moment to applaud you stepping forward in your role to lead as president of this organization, and indeed to live the change that you want to see in the world. It's deep.
Thank you, James. I see James is now gone on mute and actually put a black box around himself as well and is off camera. So mic drop. So yeah, thank you. James has been actually a really great partner and accomplice in this work with San Francisco Camerawork, and I don't think we could do a lot of this without him and his advice and consultation in a lot of areas. It's really important to have partners in this work as part of the collective, right?
I think we probably have time for one more question or comment. So not sure, it's like there's a lot of great, this is when I show my age, because I'm like, I can't really multitask. So I'm like staring at the chat and trying to read that.
I can do it if you want.
Yeah,
I feel like we've been kind of
Michelle,
going,
thanks.
it's funny because I'm supposed to be moderating and you took over because I was silent. So let's see here. So someone says here, Daquan Sweeney says, I've been thinking a lot about counter narrative as a Black photographer. And I feel like my work is a counter narrative to bias, racial stereotype, racist ideas. Do you artists on the panel, as Adrian, and then also scholars, feel the same way? Why or why not? This idea about your work as a counter narrative to bias, racial stereotype, racist ideas. I think you talked a little bit about this earlier about the pressure to provide a counter narrative and maybe not wanting to do that so much anymore.
I can speak to this a bit. I take a lot of responsibility as a scholar to write about the counter narrative, to place photographs in a long history of a particularly violent and exploitative medium. And that's predominantly what my work is doing, trying to recontextualize this history. But, and Leigh knows I mentioned this a few days ago, the photographer Tyler Mitchell spoke at MOAD earlier this year during their symposium, and he really forced me to contend with the idea of not engaging with those violent histories, not needing to produce work that's part of a counter narrative, so to speak, and instead just sort of playing in a bubble of utopia and the beautiful power of that. And I really wanted to force myself to sit with that a little bit more, and especially during an extremely heartbreaking time, I think I really needed to sit with the utopia and to be able to write around it as well. And then I also wanted to mention one of the collectives we didn't get to talk about, which is the Black Photographers of California that started in 1984, as a way to say that this is a continual conversation. Like, we keep seeing Black artists having to have these ways of thinking around the counter narrative, and they produced a book called A Day in the Life of Black LA, which I think is really helpful to think about a counter narrative in its specific regional sense, which I think we don't always think about. So, like, what does it mean that Black photographers in LA, we're saying we need to build a counter narrative to Hollywood specifically and the wrong representations there. And so I wanted to posit how we think about counter narratives like within our immediacy, and James is talking about Oakland specifically, and then not necessarily saying artists have to put the pressure on themselves to produce counter narrative work in a national or global way, but what if that work is just done in our regions? So that was a long-winded answer, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Delphine. I do think the pressure to provide a counter narrative can be real, or just, but I don't know if it's a counter narrative or if it's just kind of a real narrative, right? Of what it feels like and kind of what perceptions are. That's like in kind of my world, it's interesting. I feel like why not kind of speak the truth that one has, and it's interesting. It ends up being set up as a counter narrative, if that makes sense, even if it might just be kind of your narrative, right? Your narrative becomes counter. Why does it have to be anti or counter, if that makes sense? So that's kind of, one of the ways in which I think about it. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time here. Let me just ask actually the panelists if you have any last words, and then I do want to say a couple of words on behalf of SF Camerawork and thank you all, and then be respectful of everyone's time.
I just wanted to say something. I had to jet out, but I definitely appreciate everybody out there who joined this conversation, and to you all for hitting me up and asking me, Dr. Raiford, thank you so much. Always hit me up, Delphine. Please hit me up. I would love to have sidebar conversations with you all. So I'll definitely send you my contact information. Michelle, you're always amazing, so appreciate you always. Feel free just to email me or whatnot. I would love to learn from you all, and I would just love to learn and just like have conversations about everything that's just going on in the art world at large. Like I said, that's kind of like I'm a student with this always first. So before just opening my mouth up, I just want to like learn and just talk about like what's going on and learn about the other people out there that are working and stuff like that.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you so much,
Really appreciate it.
Appreciate y'all. I'll see y'all later.
Okay.
Bye.
And Delphine, Dr. Raiford, did you have final words, thoughts?
I have, go ahead, Delphine.
No, you go first.
No, I just want to say thank you, and I'm looking forward to continued conversations, in part because I think we are, in the moments that I'm able to kind of, lift my spirits, it's because I think we have an opportunity to actually enact and imagine and enact something better and something different for ourselves. Whether it's in the art world or it's in the university or it's just in our daily practices with each other. So I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also just wanted to extend my gratitude for being invited to take part. I haven't spoken on photography in these terms in a long time, so I really appreciate the opportunity. Every day is different. You never know what kind of mood you're going to be in these days. And the woman that James mentioned really threw me, and I was really distraught earlier. But I appreciate you all for being here and returning some new energies to me. It was really enjoyable. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I want to thank everyone here for joining. It's interesting, we talk about the politics of the collective and thinking about how we at Camerawork can think about a new collective or collectives and what those are. We've been thinking about that. We used to describe ourselves as a community, and now we're talking about different San Francisco Camerawork communities of support. We couldn't do any of this without you, who are all here. And really during this time, I will say that we ended up really reaching out to artists and scholars and others, and we continue to do that. A lot of the work that you're seeing in terms of the programming has been crowdsourcing. I also want to give a shout out to Elena Gross from Museum of the African Diaspora, because I have not done that yet, and she is serving on our programming committee. along with Erica Gentry, Dave Elfing, our interim executive director. And I do want to thank Senny Mao and also Christina Graber. So those are staff members, Christina and Senny, who have been really critical to this work as well. So I really want to say that I appreciate your support. It's been an interesting kind of turn in change for us as we've leaned into this work, and it really takes all of us. And so again, I really appreciate the board support and all the letters that many of you have sent, saying that you're really inspired by and proud of the work that we're doing, and you feel reinvigorated and really excited to join in this work. So I do want to say that that's important, and that's people of all different backgrounds saying that they really are inspired by and want to participate. I want to point that out. So thank you again, everyone. Really appreciate it, as we will lean on you and have been in some ways. And join us on September 17th for the Artist Showcase, led by James Leventhal and Adrian Burrell. And don't forget to tell everybody about the auction and bid heavily and support the artists. 50% of up to 50% of proceeds for individual sales of work go back to the artists. So we'll be directly helping artists with the auction. So thank you guys very much. All right, have a great evening. Take care.